First of all, I just want to be able to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from lands on which we gather that are the traditional lands of the Beothuk and Mi'kmaq people and the homelands of the Inuit and the Southern Inuit of Labrador. We recognize the ancestral and continued ties of Indigenous people to the lands and waters of this region that we know as Atlantic Canada. Okay, I'm just going to move one computer out of the way. This one closer. I'd like to thank everyone who joined us today with the interest of helping children to cope with grief and loss. It is not a new topic, but it is definitely one that has been getting more attention over the past couple of decades. And it is not an easy topic to discuss. For some of us, it's going to be a difficult topic. And should you feel the need to step away for a few moments, please feel free to do so. Ashley will be there to monitor if you need to join back in. Or if you need to speak to myself after the session, please let me know and I will make myself available. Okay, children are forgotten mourners. It's something that we don't give a lot of attention to all the time when a tragic situation or loss or death is happening, but it's definitely something we should pay more attention to. When putting this presentation together, I reviewed the material from a number of sources, but it was Maria Trozes, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing her name wrong, that her material resonated the most with me. I found it to be most informative and most in line with how I practice and how over the past 30 years, my involvement with children and adults, it has played out and showed to be the way that her material is very indicative of how people progress through grief. And children, like adults, face many losses throughout their life. Various forms. They come from death of a loved one to the end of a friendship to someone moving to a new community. It could be that watching their parents' relationship dissolve or someone that they love very much going into a long-term care home, someone that they might have had a lot of contact with, but now that contact is limited. These losses are a vital part of life, but they do also contribute to an opportunity for children to learn appropriate coping skills. Many times children's losses are trivialized or ignored during the aftermath or chaos of a relationship dissolving. Or, for example, when parents are going through a divorce or separation, that often they're unfortunately consumed with the legal matters of the divorce, the financial custody arrangements, trying to find childcare and just the basics to be able to continue functioning. And sometimes children don't get their fair attention. Their grief that they're going through is not paid the attention that they deserve. And understanding that children deserve and need a level of care to support them while grieving is so important for their ability to cope with an initial loss and to develop the coping skills that they need to address future losses and other situations that may cause them difficulty functioning in their daily lives. So what is grief? And we use the American Psychological Association for this definition. And grief is the anguish experienced after a significant loss, usually the death of a beloved person. Grief often includes psychological distress, separation anxiety, confusion, yearning, obsessive dwelling on the past, and apprehension about the future. And as adults, we also know this definition has to apply to us at some time in our lives, and it's definitely going to apply to us at some time in the future. And in order for us to be the caring adult in a child's life and viewed as the person who needs to create that safe environment for them to express their grief, we must first look at ourselves and how we handle grief, how we have done it in the past and how we will do it in the future. Let's look at how we express grief. Do we express it at all? Are we uncomfortable encountering a person who has just recently had a loss, a divorce, lost their job, has moved, or is in the process of being posted where they don't really want to go to? Are we uncomfortable talking about our own losses, what we've been through, what we're going through, and what we are going to go through in the future if it's an anticipated death or separation that is coming? Ashley? Let's look at some of the questions that we would ask ourselves. How do I tell my family members? That might be your immediate family members and your children. How am I going to tell them? Am I going to text them? Today, some people get very disturbing news or very traumatic news via text. How is that going to affect somebody? What have we done to manage this grief or these intense feelings in the past? How do I face people? How do I face them every day at work, in the grocery store, on the street, or what am I going to say to them? What am I going to say when people come up to me to express their sympathy or to question what happened? How am I going to be able to maintain myself, my feelings, and what I'm going through at the time to be able to handle these encounters? How much information am I going to share about the end of my marriage to somebody? How much do I feel I need to share? How am I comfortable sharing? These are all considerations to determining our own level of comfort when encountering a loss and how we are going to be able to model healthy expressions of grief and how we are going to model how we handle loss to children who are very much watching because we are their models. We are their role models, and we are the people they are going to look to learn how to do that. Okay. So parents must prepare themselves for grieving before they can be prepared to share their children's pain. It's very difficult to talk to your children about their grief and their pain when they see that you're uncomfortable talking about yours, that you're reluctant to talk about it, and will avoid it if at all possible. There's been many a parent who's knocked on a door of their teenager to say, "How are you? How are you doing?" And the teenager yells, "Fine, get out of my room." And the parent is only too happy to turn around, close the door, and walk away because they really were not equipped and ready to have that conversation with their children anyway. For some people, feelings of loss and despair are so overwhelming and do not improve even after a lengthy period of time. And I want to draw attention to this because there are some people who may not be in a position to help their children deal with their grief and who may require some intervention themselves. And if somebody is experiencing complicated grief, this is the type of grief where the emotions are so long lasting and so severe that a person has trouble recovering from their loss and resuming their own lives. So it would be recommended that they would definitely seek out some intervention to be able to help them to deal with their grief and their loss so that they are in a position to help their children. So now we're just going to look at some feelings after a death or loss. I'm not going to review the, and I'm sure most of you may be aware of Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. And I'm not going to review those because I want the focus of this presentation to be not on identifying what stage of grief your child is in or even yourself, but more so on what you're going to do no matter what stage of grief your child is in to be able to help them. So I'm not going to focus on that in any length of time. Just to point out that 3 of these 5 feelings that are showing here on this slide right now are actually stages of grief, but they are all tied in. So by just talking about how we would look at addressing these feelings and identifying them in our children, we'll be touching on Kubler-Ross's stages in a very indirect way. So normal feelings after a death or loss. Our initial feeling is shock, and that is what our brain does to be able to protect us from the initial loss that we've just learned of, that we've witnessed, or that we encountered. And then we have denial, which is when we try to convince ourselves that this has not happened, the loss or the death, or the long-term deployment or end of a relationship is not happening. Okay. And it is a time when defense mechanisms will kick in, that we'll be able to deny it, we'll be able to minimize it, and we'll be able to reframe it in such a way that we may believe what we're saying, but is not necessarily accurately what happened or is happening. Okay. Pain. We have emotional pain, of course, but we also have physical pain. And we have as a physiological feeling in the body, as some can say, a pain in the heart, or I have a pain in my chest, or I have a pain in my stomach. And that is just symptomatic, of what is actually going on emotionally, but your body is responding. It's a heightened emotional state. Your body has prepared for flight or fright. And it's so much so that this increased level of hormones that is rushing through your body is actually putting some stress on your organs. And that's where those feelings are coming from, that you are feeling physical pain. And might also result in headaches, might actually be stomach aches too, if you are someone who may have, your body responds physiologically to crisis. Numbness is just when we are suppressing the emotions and we feel nothing. Again, it's a protective measure that our body's taking. as we're processing the loss. Anger is something, it's a redirected emotion that we're expressing it through anger, but it's other emotions. It's the pain that we're experiencing that is getting expressed as anger. It's one of the most popular, or not popular, but one of the most common emotions that is expressed from a loss or experiencing grief. And disbelief, we can't believe this has happened. It's hard to fathom that this has happened. It happens to other people. It doesn't necessarily happen to me. Despair is hopelessness. What am I going to do? How am I going to get through this? What is going to happen financially? What is going to happen? My whole life is out of whack. How am I going to get this back? It's just a sense of hopelessness. Confusion, feelings of restlessness, when your brain is racing, when you are feeling agitated, that you can't think clearly, and just being able to focus on what you need to do. It's very difficult because you feel like you're in a constant state of confusion. That might last for a short period of time, or it might last for others a little bit longer. Loneliness, that's pretty self-explanatory, but it's that feeling of you're on your own, you don't have the support that you had, you're feeling possibly abandoned by if you had a spouse that left or a partner that died. You feel now you have to deal with the situations. Could be as a single parent now, so you feel isolated and lonely in that role that you have taken on. And that has been not taken on so much as given to you, but without a choice, possibly. And acceptance, has accepted the loss and prepared to move on while addressing the loss and doing it. And so it might not be 100% okay, but it's okay enough that you can move on with life and with the functioning that you need to do your day-to-day living. And do children experience grief? Children experience grief just as adults do, but how their grief is expressed may vary depending on their age. Children will experience loneliness, confusion, and possible repression of emotions, just as we reviewed with adults, how anyone can experience those emotions, and they may have a long-lasting impact. If a child is unable to share their grief in a safe place, it can scar their psychological development. If denied the opportunity to develop healthy coping systems, it will impact their ability to cope with the initial loss and to be able to cope with future losses that they may encounter. So many of the feelings we've reviewed that are felt by children, depending on their developmental stage, the degree to which they experience the feelings will be determined by a number of factors, including the value of that relationship. If it was a great-grandparent that passed away, and the great-grandparent lives on the other side of the country, and a child is 6, haven't seen the grandparent in 4 years, how much of a loss that child's going to contribute to, value that child's going to contribute to the loss of that grandparent may not be the same as a grandchild who lives in the same community and has much more frequent contact and more involvement and values that relationship more. And was it a sudden death? Was it an anticipated death? Was it something two people agreed on to separate and it was an amicable separation? Or was it a situation where there was a breach of trust? So that will determine how much the value is given to the loss of the separation or the death. There will be times when children may experience grief that do not involve the death of a loved one, but evokes the same sense of change, disruption, and mourning. So what we want to look at, and one of the focuses of this presentation, is to know that loss and grief, just not in the mourning process, doesn't not come just from a death, but also from these other circumstances that somebody might encounter, a child might be exposed to. So a divorce. Children view divorce as the death of their family. When parents get married, it's forever. Children look at their families when we're together, it's forever. So when there's the dissolution of a marriage and the divorce is happening, or the process is happening, to a child, it's like the death of the family. Remarriage. Remarriage is also a loss, because when a family initially separates, and if a mom and say 2 children move into an apartment, and they might be there on their own for 16 months, 2 years, however long, and if another person comes along and then mom is remarrying and it's a step parent, The child is going to grieve again. That family unit that they existed, the newly formed family unit, is now going to be grieved because it's another loss for a child. They might be gaining step siblings. They might be gaining a step parent whom they might like very much, but there's still possibly that potential for the loss of that family unit that they had identified as new and they had grown possibly very comfortable in. Chronic or prolonged illness or injury. If a parent or somebody they care for has been diagnosed with a chronic illness or has been suffering from a long, prolonged illness or injury, then there would be a loss. The loss is not directed physically to the child, but the loss is the loss of time that your parent might devote to you as a child, because extra time has to be devoted to the medical needs of your sibling. Or it could be due to prolonged hospital stays. It could be a loss of opportunity for recreational activities because a lot more money the family has to be directed toward the health care of your sibling. So that would be another loss. And changing schools is a loss. It could be anything from changing friends, teachers, right down to your favorite school bus driver who makes the ride to school in the morning fun and enjoyable. Graduation is a loss. You're not only losing the school that you attended, you're not only losing the friends, but you're losing the security of possibly living at home and going off to find your own way in the world. The end of a friendship is a loss. It's the end of something that may have been short-term or long-term, but it might have been a deep, close relationship and someone that you trusted. Moving to a new house or relocating to a new community or country, as many of our families do. So there's the loss of the identity of being in the country that you were comfortable, that you probably grew up in, that all your relatives are in, being far away from them, and the community that you've moved to may have new cultural practices and new priorities in terms of recreational activities and the facilities. So there's a lot of loss that can happen there too when you're moving. And myths about death, loss, mourning, and protecting children. So some of the myths that people perceive as being accurate or somewhat accurate with regard to children are: death is not a part of living, that children don't mourn, and we can protect children by shielding them from loss. Well, death is a part of living. It is definitely, because it's part of the life cycle. It is universal. No one is immune from it. In relation to a death of or the end of a relationship, say the end of a marriage, they do not last forever for everyone. And sometimes people will be exposed to it. And the stats are today in our society saying it's pretty high, about 50%. Children don't mourn. Children mourn just as adults do, but how they express it may vary a little bit. But fundamentally, the feelings that are felt are the same. And we can protect children by shielding them. We can protect them, or when children are protected, or when gatekeepers, who are normally very well-intended individuals who think they're helping at the time, prevent children from experiencing the pain that comes from a loss, it is more likely that the children will develop and endure continued psychological and physical symptoms. They will be denied the opportunity to learn those skills, which they need to know to be able to cope with future losses. Adults in their lives may feel it's better to protect them by leaving them alone. Don't push too much. Don't ask too many questions. Adults may engage in what's called a buck-up therapy. And that's when, oh, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. You don't need to cry about that. Big boys don't cry. Those kind of phrases are what's called related to buck-up therapy, where children are told it's not okay to experience the emotions that you are. Similar to buck-up therapy is asking a child to be hyper-mature, asking a young man who may be 12 or 13 to be the man of the house now, or asking a young sibling who may be a female or male to become the caretaker, to take on a lot more roles and responsibilities than they are and actually mentally or emotionally prepared to do. So 3 major functions we have as parents and caregivers, and to be the safe adult to ensure our children develop skills to process losses. First, we must be honest and open with our relationships with our children. We must provide a safe and secure space in which our children can mourn. that is not only emotionally safe, but physically safe. And to be the role models of healthy mourning, express our grief in a healthy manner and express it with our children, not to hide it from them. It's okay to let them know that you're grieving. Dr. Sandra Fox started a program in the States called the Good Mourning Program, where she at length for the past 50 years looked at and really investigated the effects of mourning and loss on children. And the program that she's developed is still running today very successfully. And other practitioners have followed her lead in what she looks at in terms of what needs to be completed for children to successfully mourn. So 4 tasks that children work through as they mourn to get to the point where they're successfully having what is a good mourning process, where they're developing the skills that they need to. As first, they have to understand what caused the loss. Knowing what happened and why is so important for children. Grieving or experiencing the painful feelings associated with the loss, being allowed to do that in a safe manner, and being able to discuss freely, question openly, and to receive honest answers to their questions so they're able to process the loss and the experience that they're going through. Commemorating the value of the loss, and going on with life by accepting and integrating the loss into life so that you are able to resume normal functioning. So the definition of death. It sounds self-explanatory, but for children, it's not so much. They need to know. So in a case, for the definition of knowing what happened and why, in the case of a loss not involving a death, the children want to know the circumstances. Children cannot feel the pain of grief unless they have had an honest answer and they've been provided with the information to have an honest understanding of what has happened. It is astounding to me, actually, that 30 years on after interviewing clients about what has happened in their lives as children and adults, many of them still cannot tell me why their parents separated, why somebody died, why somebody moved across the country to another city, what was going on. They have no idea. The response is that they were children, it wasn't shared with them, and they don't know why. And it's still impacting how they function today because they didn't have the answers to develop good coping skills, to be able to function to be able to function well when they encounter difficult situations. It is difficult to discuss death with a child. It causes adults to feel anxious and discomfort. And when an adult is anxious, children can sense it. Children know. Our level of comfort normally comes from our own childhood, what our parents said to us, how it was described to us, the words and phrases that were used. Maybe phrases like, they're gone to sleep, they've passed away, or they've expired. One researcher noted that only children related that the only way they understood the word expired was in relation to a library card. They did not know what someone expiring meant because it wasn't a clear, direct answer to what they needed to know. Or maybe adults just didn't talk about loss at all. There was a time when children were just sent to a bedroom. The questions were not considered as important. One rabbi that I read in this in Maria Troze's book is that he would go to homes to talk to people about the losses that they were experiencing. But children were in the back rooms. He didn't know, were they back there crying? Were they back there wanting to know information? But it was a thing that children were not in the room when the adults were speaking. And he wondered why he didn't talk to the children. Okay. How children utilize magical thinking refers to the unrealistic processes that all children use from time to time to make sense of a death or a loss. For example, my parents are not together because daddy didn't wear his blue shirt that mommy told him to wear. Chances are mommy and daddy would probably still not be together, whether he wore a blue shirt, a yellow shirt, a pink shirt, it doesn't matter. But that's how a small child may use magical thinking to rationalize the death or the loss. Children's cognitive abilities to understand death and loss depends on their age and developmental stage. And we're going to look further at that. Next slide, please. So the developmental stages of a childhood range in ages from preschool is 3 to 5. Latency is 6 to 8 years. Pre-adolescent is 9 to 12 years, and adolescent is 13 to 21. So we're now going to look at how children, their cognitive ability at each developmental stage will influence how they respond to death and to loss. So the developmental abilities to understand the death and loss. So under 3 years of age, children under the age of 3 feel and react to separation, but they do not have the intellectual capacity to understand the concept of death. So a child under 3 does not understand that there's a death or a loss, but they may react. They might be more difficult to settle them if they become upset. Bedtime might take longer. They might need more comforting and more support. They're not going to be able to directly say why they're responding the way they are, but it will come out more in a behavioral way. Preschoolers have predictable thinking and behavioral patterns. They think death is temporary and reversible and that they will never die and will live forever. They think that friendships that have ended can be resumed easily. Death and loss means living under the circumstances will return to status quo. Somebody might moved away 2 weeks ago, but that's okay. They just feel I'll see them when I go back to school tomorrow. They'll be back. So not realizing that those circumstances may not be reversible. Latency age children understand that death is permanent or that a friend will not be moving back to the neighborhood. They realize others will die, but they're immune to that. So when they talk about somebody dying, it's more about they're going to die, but I'm going to live forever. At this age, children want information that will make them feel safe. Children want to know what is predictable and what is going to change, and they have a need to understand these details. This age group believes that it's an age group that parents can find very challenging in terms of behaviors, because the behaviors might be coming out, but there's no clear indication as to why. They will ask for more details. They want to know the facts. They want clear details, concise, not too much information, but enough to give them the opportunity to be able to understand what is happening. They need a realistic outlook on life, and they need to know that their safety and security is always paramount and is always going to be enforced. So if they have questions, they'll ask them, but they also want to know, okay, so if this happens, so if my dad is gone, are we still going to be able to go skating? So there's questions they need to know for the follow-up. They need to understand. They're also at an age where they need reassurance, constant reassurance. So if one of their friends' parents are separating, they might come home and look for that reassurance because maybe the evening before mom and dad had a fight. So they would need to be reassured that even though we had a disagreement last night, we are still staying together as a family and we are still going to be taking care of you to make sure you are a priority, that this is a safe home, that we are going to continue as living as a family, and that this is not a concern you have to have. So they will constantly be checking and rechecking for those assurities that this is going to happen. They want predictability, which relates to their security. They want to know what's going to change. They want to know the basics, right down to, are we still going to have chicken dinner over at grandpa's, even though grandma's not there anymore? Those kind of things. They're really looking for that. Pre-adolescent children, age 9 to 12. Most pre-adolescents have an adult understanding of death. They understand it's permanent, irreversible, and universal. They realize, too, that they will die someday. They fear abandonment and want to know how their world will change after a death or loss. Pre-adolescents think abstractly, understanding the concept of cause and effect. Pre-adolescents do not ask many questions about death or loss. They want the information. They want it offered to them. They're not going to ask a lot of questions, but they do want to know the basics of, is everything going to be okay? If the security is still here. Whereas the developmental age group before them will ask lots of questions. Pre-adolescents, they're listening, they're watching, but they're not necessarily asking a lot of questions. And the rituals fascinate them. That's going to take place with regard to, could it be a death, a wake, or if there's a divorce, is there going to be a ritual to celebrate the loss of a friend moving away? How are they going to keep it in the forefront and make it important for them. So those are the kind of activities they are fascinated by, and that they will ask questions, but not necessarily about the actual death or loss. They will also have some internal concept of, I had something to do with the loss. If parents divorce or separate, it might be a feeling for them of, what did I do wrong? What could I have done differently to keep mom or dad here? Or what could I have done differently so that my 98-year-old grandfather didn't die or pass away or die? Even if that 98-year-old grandfather who died of natural causes, but they have they have a concept of, they had some part, they played a role in some way for that to happen. And that's not something they're going to ask a lot of questions about, but it's something they're going to internalize. So to be aware of how they're dealing with loss at that age is important, because they're not going to ask a lot of questions. So it might be a good time to ask them some questions. And we're going to look at some words and some phrases and how we can do that in a couple of slides. And adolescents. Even though in Canada, I know in some states, legally they don't become adults till 21, but in Canada it's 18, but the adolescent developmental stage still runs until 21. So adolescents have the cognitive ability to understand death, but still feel invincible and immortal. They often engage in risk-taking behaviors. They may blame themselves for a death or a loss. It is a time when they reconstruct their world, changing perceptions, beliefs, and attitudes. They are striving for independence and seeking information and guidance from adults at the same time to assist with formulating their own decisions. And those decisions are going to be about what's coming in their life and any changes that they're going to make. They may engage in the risk-taking behaviors, such as drinking, smoking, using drugs, sexual activity, racing down the highway, all activities that they're using to run away from the pain that they're experiencing and to feel alive, and that they still have some control over what is going on in their life. They often cope by spending time alone in their room. This is the age group that is going to seek out the developmental stage. Sorry, this is the group that is going to seek out being on their own, not really wanting to share their grief with their family, but more inclined to do it with their peer group or their friends. They often appear as moody, more prone to an angry outburst than the other age groups in terms of vocal. The other angry outbursts might be more behavioral for younger groups, but for younger children, but the adolescents are more likely to use their words to express their anger that they might be feeling while they're grieving. So we have to ensure that we do not intrude on their grief or on their desire to share their grief with their peers. But at the same time, we'll have to let them know we're there at all times, anytime, to be able to discuss how they're feeling. And not only while they're encountering grief and having to deal with what they're going through, their loss, they're also encountering issues that all adolescents will face at some point. They're going to be separating from their parents. They're going to be striking out into the world on their own and becoming independent. They're going to be identifying and accepting their own sexual identity. They're going to be making sense of their world in a moral way. What type of person am I going to become? What is going to be morals that I live by? What are going to be the values that I exude out to the world? And people will know me as being this type of person. Exploring and determining educational and employment choices that will carry them into their adulthood. What do I want to do when I graduate from high school? What trade or degree program or job do I want to get to be able to support myself? And where am I going to be going to school? So a lot of decisions that they're encountering and having to face as an adolescent, and that will be compounded if they're also experiencing grief and loss at the same time. But they will be looking to these safe adults in their life for some guidance. They might not ask the questions directly, but they are watching. They're watching and observing how we as adults respond to situations and how we make the choices we do. And often how they're learning is vicariously through watching us, seeing how we make those decisions, seeing how we proceed and move into different situations or circumstances as they are in adolescence, making a lot of changes and reconstructing the ideas of what's going on in their life. So what not to say to children? Often people will say, or a number of times over the years, I've had people say, I don't know what to say. One of the first places I would start is, well, this is what you don't say, because it will have the negative effect of what you want it to do. To say to a small child or any age children, don't cry. You have to be strong. I know how you feel. Because one of the first responses you may get, or a child may think after, they might talk to you later on, is you don't know how I feel. You don't know what I'm going through. Just give it time. It will get better. There's a reason for everything. Grandma or grandpa may be gone to a better place. They might have gone to sleep or passed away, or they've gone to heaven to help the angels. A number of these phrases, for especially a small child who is not able to understand the intent behind it, it can be confusing. To say to a preschooler that grandma went to sleep, well, then now that child might be afraid to go to sleep, because the connotation is if you go to sleep, you might not wake up. Or for a child to be told that your mom has gone to heaven to help with the angels. Well, the perception may be, well, why are they more important than me? So there may be resentment about the situation. So most of these comments are made with the best intentions, and we've all at some point said them, or we've heard them being said in different situations. It could be even when there's a divorce, everything happens for a reason. That doesn't really make someone feel better at the moment, and it's not going to provide an opportunity for someone to develop healthy coping skills if that's the logic that's provided to them to deal with the emotions that they're feeling. So grief or experiencing the painful feelings associated with loss is a psychological and physiological response to a loss. We feel grief because that is our body and our mind's way of responding to it. And it might be the loss of due to a death or a relationship or something that's no longer doable or out of our control. Anger and sadness are the primary feelings experienced by all ages, no matter what developmental stage a child is in. And children experience grief in spurts, and they tend to act out their anger and sadness, making their behaviors appear bad. Okay, and what a spurt is, because some people might not know what that means. A spurt is a short period of time. So you may have a child who is grieving for a period of time after their friend moves away. But then all of a sudden, for a couple of days, they're happy-go-lucky, no mention of their friend, no indication that they're in any way experiencing grief. Then they return to being sad again. So parents may be confused as to why did that happen, but that's how children grieve. They grieve in spurts. They don't have a long period of grief, whereas that's more likely that an adult will experience grief like that. A child is more prone to have short periods or spurts of that grief, and that might go on for a period of time. So it seems like their period of grief is shorter, when in fact it just happens in more of a broken pattern. And when they appear or they express themselves in anger or sadness, parents sometimes misinterpret that behavior. It might have been anger or sadness due to the loss, but it just comes out as just bad behavior. So you may hear someone say, this is such a hard time. Why are they acting like that? Well, they're acting like that because that's how they're experienced. That's how they are expressing their grief, because that's, rather than using the words to say it, this is how they'll behaviorally express it. The physical signs to be aware of and to look for grief may be tummy aches. It could be that it's that pain that they talk about. They say they have a pain, they have a tummy ache, they have an upset stomach. Often you will hear children say, I have a tummy ache, when really it could be related to other things. They might be feeling sad, scared, or other emotions, but it often comes out as I have a tummy ache. It could be thumb sucking. A child may have stopped sucking their thumb, but when a situation or a loss happens, they may revert back to resume thumb sucking, and because it's offering them comfort. Moodiness, that could be just happy one day, and then not so much the next, but it comes out actually in how they're physically behaving. It could be scowling, it could be their features. So people might interpret that they're being moody. Pacing and back and forth around a table, around the yard, around the house. It's a comforting behavior for them, and it may be something that's indicative of they're experiencing increased anxiety. As obsessive behavior such as hand washing, twirling hair, other behaviors that they may be doing obsessively because they're that's a sign of that they're experiencing grief or anxiety and increased anxiety, and that's how it's relieving. It's a behavior that they've learned to cope with the anxiety that they're feeling and how they express it. There may be angry outbursts, and it might be a parent might receive an angry outburst to a benign question. Might be, would you like a sandwich? The basics of a question, and the response could be an angry outburst. And a parent or another caregiver or another adult in the situation might not understand why they got such an emotional response to a simple question. Tearful anxiety, that's the release of pent-up emotion. So it could be the child can't tell you why they're crying, they don't know why they're crying, but it's how they're expressing what they're feeling at the time. And mature behavior. Again, taking on behaviors and responsibilities that are not age appropriate or might not be what a child is emotionally prepared for. And that often comes from inside the child. They sometimes they step up if one of their parents are ill or gone from the home for a long time. It could be a long-term deployment, and the child steps up to fill in the responsibilities carried out by the absent parent. So they often will take on more responsibilities than they need to, or it may be imposed on them by a parent if they need extra help around the house without realizing they might not be prepared for that and not able to express they're experiencing the grief of the loss of the absence of the person in the home. And then there's adultifying. And this is done by outside the home. And this is when other people or agencies or schools or whatever hold children as responsible adults because they may be recognizing in the absence of a parent, they're being held to the standard of an adult, which is not fair to the child and not sustainable in any way to be able for the child to develop good coping skills and providing a safe environment. So these are signs, physical signs, to be on the lookout for. So we looked at what not to say to a child. So what do we say to a child that is experiencing grief or loss? First and foremost, be honest. If a child asks a question, depending on their developmental stage that we just looked at, be honest. Give as much detail as needed, not too much, that would overwhelm them with details. But give them a straight answer. Use words that they can understand. Give them time to process it. Let them ask the next question before you offer more information. Keep it simple. Follow the child's lead. Your answers will be dictated by what they're asking you. So if they want to talk about a particular subject, go there with them. It might not be what you want to talk about. It might be a child in the latency stage saying, are bugs going to eat the bodies in the caskets? Or what happens to the body? What happens when someone is in a crematorium? What happens? So being very brief with your answers, but being honest, because that's going to allow them to develop a healthy concept of what happened and to be able to, that will lead them to be able to better understand and process in a healthy manner their grief. It's okay to say you don't understand. If at any point a child asks you a question and you don't know or you don't understand, it's okay to say that. Excuse me. It's also okay to say, I'll try to find the answer to that. I don't know right now, but for us to be able to share this grief, I'm going to find the answer. If it's appropriate, you always have to, as parents, be the screeners of the information that you share or other people share with your children. But if it's at all possible, to provide it to them because they need those clear answers. They need to be able to understand what's happening. Most importantly is keep the conversation going. Talking about grief and loss is an ongoing process with children. You're not going to have this conversation once, you're going to have it a number of times. Okay, now we're going to look at some more things to say. It's not your fault. It's very important children hear that, especially children who feel they had some impact on what did I do for mom and dad to separate? It's not your fault. They have to hear that, and they might have to hear it a number of times. It's okay to say, I don't know how you are feeling. Can you tell me? Can you tell me what that feels like? You may say, can you tell me what that feels like right now? Can you tell me what that felt like this morning? So if they're telling you about how they're feeling or they felt at any given time, go with that. Don't try to lead the conversation. Go with what they're telling you. Use direct language. Grandpa has died, is dead, or dying. And I use grandpa only because many of us will be encountering grandparents that have passed away or will be passing away down the road. Even for me, saying passing away, that comes my generational thing. And so I'm even relearning, be direct, not to be saying passing away, because that's something my generation did. So we're learning not to say that, because again, passing what? It's a concept that children need to be able to question us about, and we need to be direct about it. It's okay to say, I'm sad too, but I'm still able to care for you. I'm still able to make sure you're safe and you're secure. That's my job. And as part of my job and being your parent, that I'm going to do my very best to make sure that everything is safe and secure for you. We will get through this together. It's okay to acknowledge this is not easy, but we're going to get through it together as a family. It's okay to feel how you're feeling. There's no wrong feelings. If a child tells you they're feeling something that might not be what you would expect them to say, they might say, I'm happy. I'm happy that somebody is no longer suffering, or I'm happy that somebody is living closer to their family, even though I miss them. It's okay to say that. That's okay. It's a good feeling to have. There's nothing wrong with it. It's okay to say, I miss them too. It's okay to let them know you're grieving and you are also experiencing a loss. It's okay to have a good conversation that might include some funny anecdotes. Remember when Aunt Louise said that really funny joke? Wasn't that funny? And so they might think, well, we shouldn't be laughing at this time. It's not a time to laugh, but it's okay to laugh. And it's a good way to start a conversation with a child and to be able to remember the positive things that they may have experienced with a person who has passed away, who has died, or who has left and moved away. And what does fine feel like? If you open the door and you say to your child, how do you feel? Fine. Okay. And some people will say, okay, and walk away. But it's a little bit more to say, well, what does fine feel like today? What does fine feel like for you? When I'm fine, this is how I feel. How do you feel when you're fine? So it's providing them an opportunity to expand on how they're feeling, and to give you a little bit more insight into what is really going on in their lives in that moment and in that day. So as caregivers, and as the adults who are going to be the safe adults and provide the secure place for children to discuss grief, our primary functions are to recognize and assist with grief and show them our grief. These are the two things that we need to do, most importantly, to help them develop a good, safe place to express their grief. We have to recognize their capacity due to their developmental stages. That's important to do that. And we have to be on the lookout for those physical symptoms to be able to know what may be a symptom of grief or what the loss that they're experiencing. And we have to be able to understand where they're coming from and how to appropriately respond to where they're coming from. Children may vary due to various reasons. They may vary due to their intellect. They may vary due to their culture. They may vary due to their physical health or maturity, or for a number of other reasons. But for the most part, children will display behavior aligned with their developmental stages. And showing them our grief is so important. We want to measure what we display. We don't want to be overwhelmingly displaying grief. That can also have a negative effect, but we want to show them grief in a measured manner so that they're able to see we are experiencing it and it's a shared experience, because shared grief is diminished grief. It's okay to say to your child you're sad that the end of your marriage has ended. It's okay to say that you're not going to see your mom and dad because you're moving away further from them. It's okay to say those things, but it's okay to follow them up with, but we're going to make sure that we do everything that we're happy, that we're able to be happy and safe and secure where we're going. And recognizing and managing grief responses. So looking at the development stage and the cognitive capacity, so our response is going to be measured by that. The necessity to re-grieve has to be allowed, and we're going to look at that in our next slide. And again, the relationship with the loss. What was the value of that relationship? Was the loss sudden or anticipated? Was it something that, there was a lot of arguing, there was a lot of discord in the relationship, and then parents separate. So it might not be such a sudden loss, it might be something that was anticipated. It might be something that children thought might happen, or they've heard some indications that it might happen because children hear it in the house. Or it might be something that somebody was in a long-term care home for a very long time. And they're aware that that person might not be coming out. Or it might be someone was scheduled to deploy for a long-term deployment and that they knew it was coming. So there had been some preparatory discussion about it in the home. And then there's secondary losses. And what is secondary loss is, say if there's a relationship that breaks down, there would be the loss of a second income. There would be the loss of that spent time with the parent. There may be the loss of recreational activities or trips, holidays, whatever, because there's less money in the house. So those are secondary losses that they might have had in their life, but then due to change of circumstances, they no longer have. So re-grieving will occur throughout developmental stages. Adults normally grieve from 2 to 3 years. Children grieve longer and their period of grief may appear shorter, but that is because they grieve in spurts, active their grief, and re-grieve. So if there is a loss experienced by a child in the latency developmental stage, and say they get older, it's time to graduate, the loss might have been their parent passed away, their parent died, or their parents separated, but there's the absence of a father, we'll say. So it's time to graduate from high school. So they might show the symptoms of grief, but a parent may be confounded as to why this change of behavior, why this risk-taking behavior, why this angry young person is living in my house right now. What happened? I don't understand. But as they pass through the developmental stages, at each stage, they're going to re-grieve that loss, because they're going to encounter situations that are going to trigger them back to that loss that they initially experienced, and they're going to re-grieve it as they pass through each developmental stage. If they develop and have the opportunity to develop good coping skills, then the re-grieving may not appear to be the same or on the same level as a child who is re-grieving a loss that did not have the opportunity, did not have that safe adult or secure environment to learn how to grieve in a healthy manner. The third task that children need to do to be able to move through the mourning process is the task of commemorating and remembering the person who has died or the other significant loss that has happened. And that could be a parent separating. That could be a person going into a long-term care. So how do we remember that person, or we acknowledge them and celebrate them? Helps children understand what death and loss means, and commemorating can be formal or informal. During commemorative activities, our purpose should be to help our children to be able to deal with the impact of death or loss in their lives. But commemorating is a part of that process to be able to learn how to deal with it. It's a time where we will explain what happens after a person has died, a relationship has ended. It might be a time when we have to explain the formal tasks of commemorating, as well as exploring and engaging in the informal tasks of commemorating. So children's understanding of formal commemorative rituals, which normally would be a wake, a funeral, a memorial service, some kind of function at a mess, in terms of a memorial celebration that may happen somewhere else in the community, involving an organization. So preschoolers take all explanations literally and can be easily confused or scared by the explanations. They may require reassurance on an ongoing basis. They might want to know exactly what is happening, but their time frame to understand it is going to be short, and you may have to reiterate those details, the brief details that you will provide a number of times. Latency age children are curious about the details. They want to know what's happening next, then what's going to happen. And for some adults who are experiencing grief, it might be overwhelming, and they might find the questions too much. So there's times when people try to say, okay, we'll talk about this later. That's a shutdown, and they feel that what they have to ask and what they have to say is not important and is not valuing the grief that they're experiencing, because that's how they're coping with it. So providing those details and answering those questions might take time, might take patience, but it's something that is how they're expressing their grief. Pre-adolescents are typically curious about the ritual, but they're less likely to share fears and comments, may be considered sarcastic. This might be the age group where the children appear callous. They don't seem to have a genuine interest or seem to be a little bit morbid with their questions or comments. Adolescents are more interested in finding informal rituals, such as writing a poem or listening to music or spending time with their friends. They would rather ritualize with their own age rather than with their family, which for some families can be difficult to understand if there is a process happening in terms of a family gathering. Maybe grandparents are coming to visit because parents have separated, or grandparents are coming to help with deployment, and the teenager doesn't want to come sit at the table. They don't want to be part of the family process that's happening to be able to deal with the loss or to be able to address the absence of a person. So that's how they're dealing with it. It's not that they're not, it's just that they are in a different way that sometimes it's difficult to understand. So informal commemorative rituals are something that is unique to families. It could be based on where they live, what their cultures are, what has been done with them in the past, or what is expected in terms of flying a flag at half-mast. That's something that's informal. There's not always a lot of process or ceremony around it. There can be, but it could be at their house. Somebody hangs a flag at half-mast. It could be delivering flowers as a sign of sympathy to the home or to a funeral home. It can be drawings, sending drawings or cards to show that you are remembering the person who's no longer with you. It could be a small child may send a card with a drawing of the family as they were as a unit to a parent who's no longer living in the home. So that's their way of commemorating what their loss, that their family has changed, or that it could be a picture to a grandmother because grandpa has died, or it might be drawing pictures of a dog, a pet that has been lost, and you want to commemorate it. So the drawing goes up on the fridge with a magnet, but that's how a smaller child may commemorate it. For a teenager or an adolescent, it might be writing poetry. It could be reading poetry. It could be listening to music. Could be their favorite song, or their friend has moved away, so they're obsessively listening to the music that was enjoyed with their friends. It could be the retelling of stories. Often when there's someone has passed away, or if there's somebody who's gone into a long-term home and they're no longer able to participate in, say, family dinners, families sometimes will get together and tell stories. It's commemorating in a manner how the person who's not with them anymore. It could be wearing treasured jewelry. It could be putting a photo collage together of family members, friends. It could be a family recipe book. Recipes are shared amongst family members. And there's also the commemorating and the loss of, if a parent, say a mom, has Alzheimer's and she's no longer able to recall or to recount the recipes to their children. So if the family gets together and puts together a family recipe book, that's commemorating the loss but it's also helping to process the grief you're feeling about the loss of your mom as you knew her, even though she may still be with us. And celebrating anniversaries. On the anniversary of some people, even on the anniversary of their divorce, might celebrate in some manner, or it might be celebrating when the day someone died, or it could be celebrating the day that people became friends, and that relationship might have ended. So it might be celebrating that loss of that friendship. So the last task that children have to do to be able to move through the mourning process is going on with life by accepting it and integrating that loss into your daily life and into your functioning. For children and adolescents, going on involves a transformation, a change over time. When bereaved children can learn that the pain of grief, it subsides. It will ebb and flow, but eventually over time, it will subside as long as they are moving into integration of that loss into their life. It involves a shifting of attachment, not a severing. So the value of that attachment may change, and it might look different, and it might not be at the forefront as much as it was at one point, but it's not gone. It's not severed and cut off totally. It's just maintaining that connection. Our role is to help children realize that mourning and experiencing grief is not about forgetting a loved one or a loss. It is about developing a connection that might look different. It is about expanding a toolbox that includes skills to survive the loss and to be able to go on with life. So when a child experiences grief and loss, and as they watch their parents, observing how they behave, also taking in what is said to them, how it's said, is it said in a safe environment, which could be an environment that is their bedroom. It could be an environment that's the car ride to work or to school. It could be their backyard and their favorite hiding place in their treehouse, wherever. It's something that happened in a safe environment, and they will remember that it was a discussion that didn't make them feel uncomfortable. Or if it did, it subsided after they had that conversation, and they were able to learn the skills to encounter those similar situations in the future in terms of loss. So the one thing that the research has showed, and Maria has definitely indicated in her material, is that children will remember. They will remember how grief was handled, just as we do. We remember how our parents handled grief. We know how we learned how to deal with grief from them, or through our own experiences, or through our own, I'll say, research, how we want to be able to do that. But people will not always remember what was said, but we will remember how we felt at the time. So I love this quote by Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I believe that is so true, because that is something that lingers a lifetime and gives us the tools and the skills to be able to deal with similar situations in the past. And what we will impart with our children will definitely be influenced by how we felt at the time. So now, as we come to the end of our presentation, this last slide just has my contact information on it. And it has other additional resources if you feel the need to contact them at any time, or if you want to share them with your children. Definitely make that available to them at some point, or share with them that there are resources they can contact and be in contact with, or have services provided by. And if the topic is grief or death, or other topics that they might be experiencing that is causing some diminished mental health at this time. Also, there is the QR code, which is 100% giving that to Ashley, because when I saw it, I said, oh, that's an Ashley. So there's additional grief resources there if you're interested in learning more about grief, following up about information about children and grief-related issues, and if you just want to enhance your own skills or enhance your own toolbox or your knowledge base about that. So you're able to contact these resources. You can also contact me if you want additional resources, or if you want to talk more about what we talked about today, if you have other questions or other topics that you might want to know about, or if you want to discuss that if there is a service available for someone in your family, if it might be something that can be beneficial to their mental health or to your own, certainly get in touch with me. Anyone who registered today will be provided with a copy of this, The Invisible String, which is a fantastic storybook that talks about children being able to maintain connections with people in their lives who have left for various reasons, and if they're experiencing separation anxiety, grief, or loss. And we will also provide the accompanying workbook with that, which has over 50 plus activities that will help parents and caregivers and those safe adults to be able to guide their children to processing what they're feeling and how they're feeling it, and what they can do to develop coping skills that will surely benefit them as they go through their life. So thank you for sharing this experience with us about exploring grief and how to talk to children. And if you have any comments or questions, please feel free or write them in the chat box, and we'll be sure to look at them. Thank you so much for your time.